We're stepping back into an era when vinyl wasn't just music. It was magic. These albums weren't background noise. They were the heartbeat of our youth, the anthems of long summers and late nights. Let's dust off the sleeves and relive the moments that made rock history unforgettable.
With the gold of sunshine and my tunes.
There's something almost spiritual about American Beauty. Released in November 1970, this fifth studio album from the Grateful Dead marked a turning point, stepping away from psychedelic sprawl and embracing warm, rootsy Americana. The harmonies between Jerry Garcia, Bob Weir, and Phil Lesh feel like a front porch conversation, inviting you to sit a while. Every note is steeped in acoustic guitar warmth, subtle pedal steel swells, and Robert Hunter's poetic, deeply human lyrics. This was the Dead at their most accessible, without losing the magic that made them legends. Critics hailed it as one of their most cohesive works, and over the years it has become a staple on greatest albums lists. Tracks like Ripple and Box of Rain aren't just songs, they're touchstones for an entire generation, reminders of open fields, worn denim, and the faint smell of campfire smoke. If you were around when American Beauty first spun on a turntable, you remember the way it felt like a soundtrack to life itself. Maybe you heard it drifting from a neighbor's porch, or playing in a dorm room with incense curling in the air. The Dead were never just a band. They were a community, a way of seeing the world. This album bottled that feeling. Even today, dropping the needle on American Beauty is like unlocking a memory. The mix of folk, country, and rock feels timeless, and Garcia's guitar lines still carry that bittersweet, wandering soul. It's a record that doesn't shout. It whispers, and somehow that makes it echo even louder across the years. For anyone building a classic rock vinyl collection, American Beauty isn't optional. It's essential. Not because it's flashy, but because it's honest. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound statements come in the simplest melodies, and that beauty, true beauty, never fades. When Paranoid dropped in September 1970, it didn't just make waves. It carved a whole new river through the rock landscape. The second studio album from Black Sabbath was raw, unapologetic, and heavier than anything most listeners had ever heard. From the moment Tony Iommi's down-tuned guitar growls to life, you know you're not in the safe territory of radio pop anymore. You're stepping into something darker, grittier, and strangely exhilarating. Built on thunderous bass from Geezer Butler, Bill Ward's pounding, primal drumming, and Ozzy Osbourne's hauntingly unpolished vocals, Paranoid became the blueprint for heavy metal. Yet for all its raw power, the album had precision. Songs like War Pigs and Fairies Wear Boots weren't just noise. They were tightly structured epics, tackling themes from political hypocrisy to psychedelic paranoia. Even the title track, famously written in just a few minutes as filler, became an anthem that defined an era. For those who were there in the early 70s, hearing Paranoid for the first time was like crossing a threshold. The world was still reeling from the 60s, with its idealism and protests. And here was a record that stripped away the peace and love veneer to confront a harsher reality. It was the sound of factory towns after the work whistle, of oil-stained denim jackets, of kids blasting vinyl in basements while their parents shook their heads upstairs. There was a rebellious thrill in owning Paranoid. Dropping the needle and feeling that opening riff rumble through your chest was like a private initiation. The lyrics spoke in riddles and warnings, touching on war, madness, and survival. Not the dreamy escapism of some rock contemporaries, but the cold steel edge of a world in flux. Even today, Paranoid remains a masterclass in how an album can define a genre. Its production may lack the polish of later metal records, but that's its charm. It's pure, unfiltered energy. The cover, originally designed with a different title in mind, only adds to its mystique, a strange, almost surreal image that's as iconic now as the music it represents. Half a century later, this record still roars with the same ferocity it had in 1970. For any classic rock vinyl shelf worth its salt, Paranoid isn't just a recommendation, it's a rite of passage. It's the kind of album that, once you've heard it, changes the way you hear everything else. In March of 1973, Pink Floyd released an album that didn't just enter the charts. It rewrote the rules of what an album could be. The Dark Side of the Moon was more than music. It was an experience, a seamless journey from first note to last breath. Its blend of progressive rock, lush studio experimentation, and deeply human themes made it a cultural milestone. Alan Parsons' engineering wizardry turned sound into space, using tape loops, analog synths, and stereo panning that felt revolutionary at the time. From the reflective melancholy of Time to the soaring catharsis of Eclipse, every track bleeds into the next, creating a continuous sonic landscape. The iconic Prism cover became a symbol recognized even by those who had never heard the record. For Floyd fans, this was the moment the band evolved from cult favorite to international phenomenon. Hearing The Dark Side of the Moon for the first time in the 70s was a moment you didn't forget. Maybe you were sprawled on a shag carpet in a dimly lit room, eyes closed, letting the sound swirl around you. Maybe it was playing in a friend's basement after midnight, the faint glow of a lava lamp keeping time with the heartbeat in the speakers. This wasn't background music. It demanded your full attention. Its themes, life, death, madness, and the relentless passage of time, resonated with a generation standing at the crossroads of youthful idealism and adult reality. It was a mirror, reflecting both the beauty and the chaos of the human experience. That's why it stayed on the Billboard charts for an astonishing 741 weeks. Because it wasn't just a record, it was a ritual. Today, The Dark Side of the Moon remains one of the most essential vinyl listens ever pressed. Drop the needle, and you're transported, across decades, across memories, and maybe even across dimensions. When Rumours arrived in the spring of 1977, it felt like lightning in a bottle. An album born from chaos that somehow turned heartbreak into harmony. Recorded while the band was unraveling in a storm of breakups, betrayals, and excess. It shouldn't have worked. Yet, what emerged was a masterclass in pop rock perfection, with Christine McVie's graceful melodies, Stevie Nicks' mystical storytelling, and Lindsey Buckingham's sharp-edged arrangements all colliding in a beautiful, bittersweet blend. The production was pristine, without losing warmth. John McVie's bass lines walked with quiet confidence beneath Mick Fleetwood's steady, understated drumming. Every track, whether tender or defiant, felt carefully crafted yet emotionally raw. From the airy glide of Dreams to the driving pulse of Go Your Own Way, Rumours proved that real emotion resonates far longer than studio polish ever could. For anyone who lived through its release, Rumours wasn't just an album. It was a shared diary. You might remember hearing it on the radio during a long car ride up the coast, or spinning it in your bedroom while processing a first breakup. The lyrics felt personal, as if the band had found a way to put your own tangled emotions into song. Its chart dominance was staggering. 31 weeks at #1 in the US, and over 40 million copies sold worldwide. But statistics can't measure what it meant to the people who leaned on it. Finding comfort and catharsis in every chord, it was proof that even in the midst of personal wreckage, beauty could be built. Today, Rumours stands as one of the most universally loved albums of the classic rock era. A record you can play at any gathering and watch heads nod in unison. It's a time capsule of the late 70s, but it's also timeless, still able to soothe, inspire, and stir the soul. In the autumn of 1977, Out of the Blue burst onto the scene like a Technicolor sunrise. Jeff Lynne and Electric Light Orchestra had already carved a niche with their blend of rock and classical, but this double album was their magnum opus. a sprawling 70-minute symphony of melody, invention, and joy. Lynn's songwriting danced between the futuristic and the familiar, weaving together lush string arrangements, layered harmonies, and infectious hooks that made every track feel like a world unto itself. The album's Concerto for a Rainy Day suite alone was a revelation. 4 songs flowing seamlessly, capturing the gloom of a storm before exploding into the sheer jubilation of Mr. Blue Sky. Elsewhere, Turn to Stone pulsed with driving urgency, while Sweet Talkin' Woman dripped with pop sophistication. This wasn't just a rock album. It was a fully orchestrated experience, recorded with meticulous detail that still shines through every groove of the vinyl. For fans in the late 70s, Out of the Blue was more than music. It was an event. The gatefold cover art, with its sleek spaceship design, felt like holding a ticket to the future. Sliding the record from its sleeve and setting it on the turntable was a ritual, one that promised a journey far beyond the confines of your living room. And for many, those journeys happened under headphones late at night, sprawled out on the bed, watching the lights of the stereo flicker in time with the music. What made the album resonate so deeply was its balance of ambition and accessibility. You didn't have to be a music theorist to be swept away by the soaring chorus of Mr. Blue Sky or the galloping rhythm of It's Over. Yet beneath the pop sheen lay layers of intricate arrangements that revealed themselves with every listen. The record was a commercial triumph, selling over 10 million copies worldwide, and cemented ELO's reputation as one of the most creative forces of the decade. But numbers alone can't explain its staying power. Out of the Blue endures because it captures something rare, the pure exhilaration of sound, the feeling that music can lift you above the clouds and let you see the world in brighter colors. Today, dropping the needle on Out of the Blue still feels like a small act of time travel. In its grooves is the optimism of the late 70s, the thrill of discovery, and the reminder that rock music, at its best, can be as grand and limitless as the imagination itself.
Take a look at my girlfriend. She's the only one I got.
By the time Breakfast in America hit the shelves in March 1979, Supertramp had already made a name for themselves as masters of sophisticated, hook-laden rock. But this album, bright, clever, and irresistibly catchy, was the moment they reached the absolute peak of their powers, a perfect blend of Roger Hodgson's soaring optimism and Rick Davies' grounded wit. It delivered 12 tracks of polished pop rock that still sparkle decades later. The production was pristine, each instrument sitting perfectly in the mix. Hodgson's high, yearning vocals carried songs like The Logical Song and Take the Long Way Home into the Stratosphere, while Davies' bluesy, piano-driven grit kept things rooted. Layer in John Helliwell's warm saxophone, Dougie Thompson's melodic bass lines, and Bob Siebenberg's crisp drumming, and you had an album that could glide effortlessly between quirky charm and heartfelt introspection. For many, Breakfast in America became the soundtrack to summer road trips, dorm room sing-alongs, and those lazy Sunday mornings when you had nowhere to be. The title track's playful look at American culture from a British perspective made listeners smile, even as it subtly poked fun. And Goodbye Stranger, with its breezy guitar and unforgettable chorus, was the kind of song you couldn't help but hum long after the record stopped spinning. The album's cultural impact was immediate and massive. It topped the charts in countries around the world, selling over 20 million copies and winning 2 Grammy Awards. But more importantly, it cemented Supertramp's place in the pantheon of bands who could be both intelligent and immensely listenable. They were sophisticated without pretension, writing songs that spoke to both the heart and the head. Listening to it now, the album feels like a snapshot of a very particular moment in rock history. The tail end of the 70s, when vinyl ruled the living room, and pop rock still had depth and ambition. Drop the needle on Breakfast in America today, and it's like stepping back into a world of soft sunlight through kitchen windows, the smell of coffee in the air, and the promise of a day that's yours to spend however you please. From its charming album art to its flawless track list, this was the kind of record you could and still can play from start to finish without skipping a single song. It's a reminder that sometimes the most enduring albums are the ones that make you feel both lighter on your feet and a little more thoughtful in your soul. By 1983, the Police had already conquered radio waves around the world, but Synchronicity was the moment they reached their artistic summit. It was a sleek, moody, and sonically adventurous record that blurred the lines between rock, pop, and new wave. Sting's literate, sometimes cryptic lyrics paired with Andy Summers' atmospheric guitar textures and Stuart Copeland's razor-sharp drumming created an album that was as cerebral as it was catchy. From the haunting minimalism of Every Breath You Take to the brooding build of King of Pain and the swirling urgency of Wrapped Around Your Finger, Synchronicity proved that a rock album could be both deeply emotional and commercially dominant. It was meticulously crafted, yet still had the bite and unpredictability that had fueled the Police from the start. For fans at the time, hearing Synchronicity felt like witnessing a band at their absolute creative peak. The album had a certain polish. Its soundscapes were wide and cinematic, but it still carried the tension and edge of a live performance. Many remember dropping the needle and being pulled into a world of strange imagery, layered rhythms, and melodies that stuck in the mind for days. The cultural impact was enormous. Synchronicity topped charts in multiple countries, won 3 Grammy Awards, and solidified the Police as one of the defining bands of the early 80s. But beyond the accolades, it became one of those records you could return to endlessly, always finding something new in the details, whether it was a subtle percussion flourish, a clever lyric twist, or the way Sting's voice cracked just enough to let the emotion through. Today, Synchronicity stands as a reminder of a time when rock could push boundaries and still dominate the mainstream. It's the kind of album that rewards both casual listens and deep, focused immersion, proof that sophistication and mass appeal don't have to be opposites. By the time 1984 hit turntables in January of its namesake year, Van Halen were already rock royalty. But this album was different. It wasn't just another hard rock release. It was a cultural explosion. Eddie Van Halen's fearless leap into synthesizers gave the record a futuristic sheen without sacrificing the searing guitar work that had made him a legend. The result was an album that bridged the gap between arena-shaking rock and pop accessibility, making it one of the most iconic releases of the decade. Every track pulsed with swagger. Panama roared with unfiltered adrenaline. Hot for Teacher blended jaw-dropping musicianship with wild-eyed humor. And I'll Wait showed a moodier, more atmospheric side. David Lee Roth's charisma was at full throttle, every lyric delivered with that wink and a grin charm, while Alex Van Halen's drumming thundered like an engine at full rev. Even in its quieter moments, 1984 never lost its sense of forward momentum. For fans in the mid-80s, 1984 wasn't just an album, it was a soundtrack to pure freedom. You could hear it blasting from muscle cars with the windows down, echoing through high school gymnasiums before a big game, or spinning on home stereos while teenagers practiced air guitar in front of their mirrors. It was the sound of a band, and an era unafraid to go bigger, brighter, and bolder. The cover art, depicting a mischievous cherub sneaking a smoke, perfectly captured the album's playful yet rebellious spirit. And its commercial impact was staggering. 1984 sold over 10 million copies in the US alone, powered by chart dominance and relentless MTV airplay. It marked Van Halen's transformation from a hard rock powerhouse into a household name, capable of uniting metalheads, pop fans, and casual radio listeners under one roof. Looking back now, 1984 feels like the last great party before the band's original era shifted. Not long after its release, tensions led to David Lee Roth's departure, making the album a kind of perfect, defiant curtain call for that lineup. But its legacy hasn't dimmed. If anything, the record has grown in stature, standing as one of the definitive examples of how rock could evolve without losing its soul. Drop the needle on 1984 today, and it still feels fresh. The synths shimmer, the riffs bite, and that unmistakable energy crackles through every track. It's more than a Van Halen album. It's a time capsule of unapologetic fun, electric musicianship, and the boundless optimism of the rock scene at its peak. When the Joshua Tree arrived in March 1987, it felt less like an album release and more like a cultural event. U2 had already been climbing the mountain of rock stardom, but this was the summit, drawing from American roots music, gospel, and their signature post-punk edge. The band crafted a record that was both intimate and vast, like standing in the middle of a desert with the horizon stretching endlessly before you. The production, helmed by Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois, gave each track a cinematic scope. The Edge's shimmering delay-soaked guitar was the sonic backbone. Bono's vocals were brimming with urgency and vulnerability, and the rhythm section of Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr. provided a steady, heartbeat-like pulse. From start to finish, the Joshua Tree felt like a spiritual journey through hope, loss, and the search for meaning. For listeners in the late 80s, the album was a companion for both quiet nights and open-road escapes. You could hear it drifting from cassette decks in cars barreling down highways, or filling the air at college dorm parties. It spoke to big dreams and bigger questions, reflecting the optimism and restlessness of the era. Its impact was immediate and immense. The Joshua Tree topped charts in over 20 countries, earned U2 a Grammy for Album of the Year, and cemented their place as one of the defining bands of their generation. But beyond the awards, it was the kind of record that made you stop whatever you were doing just to listen, because every song felt like it was speaking directly to you. Today, the album stands as one of rock's most enduring works. Drop the needle, and you're back in that wide-open space it created, where music wasn't just sound, but landscape, emotion, and memory all at once.
Loves her mama, loves Jesus.
When Full Moon Fever arrived in April 1989, it felt like a late-night conversation with an old friend. Familiar, comforting, but full of surprises. It was Tom Petty's first solo album, though it carried the DNA of his work with the Heartbreakers. Produced by Jeff Lynne of ELO fame, the record shimmered with a clean, airy sound that was both timeless and distinctly of its era. Petty's raspy drawl was front and center, framed by jangling guitars, tight harmonies, and just enough studio polish to make each track sparkle without losing its soul. While the Heartbreakers were absent in name, several members contributed to the sessions, giving the record a familiar heartbeat. Petty and Lynne crafted a perfect balance of upbeat rockers and introspective ballads, resulting in an album that flowed like a road trip soundtrack, each song a stop along the way, each moment another memory. From the breezy confidence of I Won't Back Down to the wistful storytelling of A Face in the Crowd, Full Moon Fever was built to be lived with, not just listened to. For fans in the late 80s, the album became a fixture in every cassette deck and on every turntable. You could hear it pouring out of car windows in the summer, floating through open kitchen doors on a Sunday afternoon, or spinning quietly while friends talked into the small hours of the night. It was one of those records that worked in any mood, bright enough to lift your spirits, grounded enough to meet you in your reflective moments. The album's success was massive. Triple platinum in the US, several hit singles, and critical praise that hailed it as one of Petty's finest works. But beyond the numbers, Full Moon Fever felt personal. It was Petty speaking directly to his listeners, sharing pieces of his heart with a sincerity that made the record feel like it belonged to you alone. Looking back, Full Moon Fever stands as the perfect bridge between classic rock's golden age and the modern era. It proved that even as the 80s closed and a new decade loomed, rock could still be honest, heartfelt, and utterly unpretentious. Dropping the needle today brings back that same feeling of open skies, long roads, and the comfort of knowing some music will always be there when you need it. We've journeyed through some of the most unforgettable albums of the 70s and 80s. Records that weren't just collections of songs, but time machines, pulling us back to a world of vinyl crackle, concert ticket stubs, and long drives with the windows down. These albums shaped the soundtrack of a generation, and their magic still echoes today. Which one brought back the most memories for you? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed reliving these timeless classics, be sure to like, subscribe, and keep the music alive. Until next time, keep the vinyl spinning.